Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. I'm Charlie Smith, the Executive Director of ESIG. I also serve in a leadership role with the Global Power System Transformation Consortium, or G-PST, whose mission is to bring together key actors across the globe to catalyze a rapid, clean energy transition at unprecedented scale and speed. This is being done by providing a coordinated and holistic approach to the necessary knowledge, education, and support to power system operators across the 5 action pillars. The foundation of the G-PST is a group of 6 system operators from around the globe who are facing higher penetration of wind and solar inverter-based resources sooner than other operators in the world. The 5 pillars of the consortium include research and peer learning, technical support, workforce development, standardization, and open data and tools. ESIG is lead on Pillar 1, and more information on the G-PST can be found at globalpst.org. As lead on Pillar 1, ESIG would like to welcome you to the May monthly webinar of our joint G-PST Pillar 1 ESIG webinar series. This series is in addition to the regular ESIG monthly webinar series and focuses on the G-PST research agenda and associated topics being addressed in Pillar 1. Topics are presented by both the system operators active in Pillar 1, as well as members of industry and the research community participating in the G-PST. An additional series of webinars on the other 4 pillars of the G-PST is also being provided on a monthly basis through NREL. For those of you who would like to learn more about the G-PST and how to engage, please go to globalpst.org and click on the Get Involved tab. Further information on ESIG can be found at esig.energy. Next, I'd like to go over a few logistical matters before we get started. First of all, lines will be muted for the duration of the webinar to avoid unnecessary distractions. For the Q&A, we'll use the Slido platform at slido.com. To ask a question, please navigate to slido.com and enter ESIG14 as the event code. The instructions are also at the bottom of the screen. You'll see a thumbs up button next to the questions on Slido to allow you to cast a vote to help prioritize the questions submitted. We plan to save about 10 minutes for Q&A at the end and then wrap it up at the top of the hour. An email with a link will be provided once the video file has been posted. We also plan to provide short responses to unanswered questions after the webinar, so please don't be afraid to ask your questions through Slido. Today's topic is on market products for system stability. As you might imagine, with the changing nature of the resource mix and the retirement of conventional synchronous machines with their inherent physical properties like inertia and fault current contribution, this is a topic of increasing interest and importance to the industry. Like other system operators experiencing declining levels of system services from synchronous generation, the system operator of Great Britain, ESO, needs alternative sources of stability services. Since 2019, the Stability Pathfinders have explored stability requirements and procurement of long-term stability services, but there's still a reliance on the dispatch of synchronous generation to ensure stability on short-term timescales. The development of a broader stability market offers a route to access stability services through an open, transparent, and competitive process specific to stability services. In 2021, ESO launched the Stability Market Design Innovation Project to explore the design of an enduring stability market. This webinar will discuss the operability challenges ESO has faced and how they are combating them through new market design. It will be presented by Ed Farley, Senior Market Development Lead in the Markets Department at ESO. Ed joined the ESO in 2021 after previous experience working for npower, one of the traditional Big Six energy suppliers in GB. At ESO, Ed has worked on the project to reform reserve products and is currently focused on the design of groundbreaking stability markets to help address the falling stability levels as GB transitions to a zero-carbon electricity system. The ESO is a leader in the G-PST and an active contributor to ESIG. I greatly value their leadership and contributions to the industry, and I look forward to hearing what Ed has to say. Okay, just a short reminder once again to use Slido at slido.com with the event code of ESIG14 to ask your questions. So let's go ahead and get started. Ed, I will now turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Charlie. And I will just share my screen. If you could just give me a heads up to check that you can see that okay.
Yep, looks good.
Brill. Thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you're dialing in from. Thank you very much for taking the time to dial in and for the invitation to come and talk to you today about market products for system stability. Without further ado, I'll get into it and I'll share a little bit about what I'm going to talk about today. So I wanted to introduce, for those of you who don't know, the electricity system operator in GB, what we do, and some quite exciting changes that are happening in a few months' time. Provide a little bit of background on our decarbonisation journey, where are we in it, and what are the key operability challenges that we face. These include those specific to stability. I wanted to touch briefly on the controls that we have in place currently to help us manage frequency and inertia, and why the link between those is important. Share a little bit of information on how we currently meet our stability needs and how this has transitioned over the last few years. As Charlie mentioned in his introduction, we've ran a series of Pathfinders, so I'll share a little bit of an overview about what they are, what they've done, and then get to the exciting stuff about what we're doing on stability markets here and now, and how we expect these to transform in the next few years. So, electricity system operator, ESO, as I'll refer to us throughout, we are the system operator in Great Britain. Our current role is quite difficult to summarise into 6 bullet points, but I've tried my best. So we are responsible for safe and secure operation of the electricity system. So our day-to-day main responsibility is to keep the lights on in GB. This includes ensuring that the system remains balanced for energy, but also that system constraints are appropriately reflected and considered in the overall optimization and operation of the system. We manage the connections process to the grid, so quite a hot topic in the last few years in GB, with significant growth in renewable generation, storage, new technologies wanting to connect to the grid. So we're doing a lot of work in the space on how we can accelerate connections as quickly as possible. My speciality, where I work in the ESO, is on designing and implementing efficient markets. So we have various teams across markets that look at short-term reforms to ancillary services, all the way through to longer-term, more substantial reforms, such as the current review of electricity market arrangements, which is ongoing with government and Ofgem. We also model the electricity network. I think some of your members may be familiar with some of our network colleagues who do a lot of work in modeling system conditions, voltage stability, thermal constraints, as well as longer term forecasting of energy scenarios. We also manage codes and different elements of regulation in GB. So we have several codes that underpin everyday system operation. And throughout all of this, we are a big interface with stakeholders. So we do a lot of stakeholder engagement across the piece. But most excitingly, and some of you may be aware of this already, we're undergoing a period of transition at the moment. So as announced last year, we are going to become a new organisation, the National Energy System Operator. So I may refer to us as NESO throughout, and this will be as of the 1st of July this year. And this is representation that we will become a government-owned entity, so we'll be separate from National Grid Group, and we're undertaking several additional responsibilities to ensure that we can get to net zero within the timescales that we're required to. So some of these are listed on the right-hand side of this slide. They include whole system network planning, so not just our current remit for electricity, but also expand into other fuels such as gas. We will take on additional roles for resilience and emergency management, provide strategic advice to government through net zero energy insights, and also expand our market development and security of supply remit to whole energy and gas as well. So that's a little bit of background about us as an organisation, but as a country and as a power system, what are the trends that we've seen? And this isn't a new story. I'm sure many members and previous guests have shared their similar experiences with the decarbonisation journey that each power system is on around the world. In GB, we're one of the fastest decarbonising countries in the world, and what we wanted to highlight here is how that's changed, particularly over the last 10 to 15 years. The graph on the left-hand side shows the correlation of zero carbon generation with fossil fuel generation as an average monthly generation mix. So the headlines, fossil fuel generation has reduced as an average monthly contribution by 60% in the last decade. So we're seeing across the board greater penetration of renewables, more variability as well. And we can highlight just in the last couple of weeks, there's been a couple of new records that have been broken for lowest carbon intensity and the highest penetration of zero carbon resources. So our record as it stands is a 92% penetration of zero carbon. We have a couple of target deadlines that we're working towards, which are highlighted here. So by 2025, we have a target to operate the transmission system carbon-free for short periods of time. So this is very much in the forefront of everybody's mind here in GB. How do we establish the right protocols, processes, ancillary services, and policy to allow us to do that? And then in the longer term, by 2035, our ambition and target to decarbonise the electricity network entirely by 2035 all year round. So that's more general, but when it comes to system stability, what has that overall big picture, what sort of impact has that had? So we use system stability to describe a broad range of things. They might mean different things to different people, but some of the things that we capture within this broad brush are inertia, short circuit level, dynamic voltage support, dynamic reactive power, loss of mains protection, and fault ride through. So that's how we capture it, but we're going to focus on two things primarily today in today's presentation, and that's inertia and short circuit level, because this is the foundation for how we developed our stability markets here in GB. These two graphs on the left-hand side show a similar story based on the graph that I showed on the previous slide about the overall picture of how the UK technology mix is decarbonising. On the left-hand side, you can draw two main conclusions, really. The purple dots are the inertia contribution from the market from the energy market in 2009 versus in gold, the same metric for 2021. The first observation is demand has reduced quite significantly between that time period, but more interestingly for this presentation, the contribution of inertia from the energy market has also declined quite significantly. So the general trend, as renewables continue to penetrate, more so the average amount of inertia that we have on the system is declining. And that message is similar for short circuit level as well when comparing just over a shorter timescale from 2019 to today. So there's a little bit of context being provided about what is the state of play, how is the system evolving. I wanted to share a little bit about how here at National Grid ESO we have implemented controls and policy reform in the last few years, as well as new ancillary services products to help us manage frequency and to manage inertia. So we had a deviation on the power system which led to an outage back in 2019. And following that, there was a whole industry review. One of the outputs from that was that ESO should start producing an annual report, which is entitled the Frequency Risk and Control Report, or FRCR for short. And this report sets out our cost versus risk appetite when managing frequency and inertia on the GB electricity system. So we undertake modelling every year to predict, model, forecast, simulate frequency disturbances on the grid under different scenarios. Those different scenarios include different levels of inertia, different levels of response, different size of largest loss. And we repeat those simulations to try and strike a balance between what is the cost-effective way of securing risk on behalf of the GB consumer. And as I said, we run this process annually. We consult on the report every year, and Ofgem, the regulator here in GB, effectively approves and signs off the FRCR on an annual basis. I mentioned inertia within that and how the inertia operating policy relates to FRCR. So one thing that FRCR does is it sets out the minimum amount of inertia that we must hold in GB. And the reason we do that is because that provides an input to how much frequency response we have to hold, how quick our frequency response products have to be, etc. And over the last few years, we've seen a little bit of change in this area, and we have also used FRCR to try and signpost further cost savings that we could realise through optimising the way that we hold inertia on the system in the next couple of years. So historically, we had always operated the transmission system with a minimum inertia threshold of 140 GVA seconds. The FRCR report that we published last year in 2023 recommended a reduction in this threshold to 120 GVA seconds, and a longer term plan, if deemed safe, secure, cost effective, to reduce that threshold further by 2025 to 102 GVA seconds. So there's a general trajectory and plan to try and reduce that inertia threshold to reduce cost of how we optimize inertia on the grid without compromising on system security. Where we are currently is somewhere between the 140 and 120 positions on this transition. So the current minimum operating threshold for inertia in GB is 130 GVA seconds. So you'll see me reference that later in the presentation, but there's a commitment to reduce that further. The other part of frequency and inertia policy, ancillary service, risk appetite that I wanted to mention is our new suite of dynamic frequency response products. So as many of you will be aware, there is an intrinsic link between inertia and system frequency. The more inertia that you have, the slower the rock off, typically the less frequency response or the less quick frequency response you have to hold. And the inverse is true. So as we've seen in the earlier slides, the general trend of decarbonisation, increased penetration of non-synchronous resources, we've seen lower inertia, we've seen frequency disturbances happen quicker and of greater magnitude. So back in 2019, we started a process to reform our frequency response products. Previous to this, we procured frequency response through units in the balancing mechanism, so our main residual balancing market. Typically, this would be from thermal power stations that were synchronized to the grid. We next introduced monthly procurement of frequency response through an ancillary service called firm frequency response, as well as some longer term contracts as well to try and incentivize investment. However, from 2019 onwards to today, we've seen the biggest shift in how frequency response products have evolved. So those monthly procured firm frequency response products that I mentioned are now replaced with a new suite of dynamic products. And these are categorized into pre-fault and post-fault response products. So they help us to secure the frequency in the event of a fault, but also help us to regulate frequency pre-fault, whether that be driven by changes in demand or potential fluctuations with wind generation, for example. To talk briefly about the products that we've designed and what they do, I've listed the three here. Also provided a diagram on the right hand side which shows how the three products interact. One thing to say to start with, in GB we have system frequency of 50 Hertz, and as the ESO we're obliged to maintain that within 0.5 Hertz. So our frequency response products have been designed with that in mind, with the inertia assumptions in the background, so that we can secure the largest loss within that threshold. The first product I wanted to briefly mention is dynamic containment. So this is our main post-fault dynamic frequency response product, and this is designed to help contain frequency within those statutory limits that I mentioned, following a disturbance on the grid. And we procure all of these services through both high frequency response and low frequency response products. Dynamic containment is the fastest of our services. There is an initiation time of half a second, full delivery within a second, and a delivery duration of 15 minutes. So these are required to catch the really big faults on the grid when frequency is straying outside of operational limits towards those statutory edge cases. The next product is equally quick, dynamic moderation, but it's designed to operate at a slightly wider threshold of frequency. So typically where frequency is deviating by greater than 0.1 Hertz, you'd see dynamic moderation products begin to kick in and respond. Dynamic regulation is the slowest service, and it operates closest to 50 Hertz. So this is designed to regulate frequency pre-fault, to ensure that we try and stay as close to 50 as we can. And as this webinar is about market products, I thought I'd touch on a little bit about how we procure those response products through a market, and it may also set some context for some of the decisions that we've made further on when we talk about stability markets. So all of these dynamic products are procured at the day ahead stage through a pay-as-clear co-optimized auction. So that means that market participants can submit bids for any one of these three services, and they can be co-optimized together. So we publish our requirements, market providers can respond and show which combinations of products they may wish to offer, and we can co-optimize them to get maximize the welfare for the consumer. These products have guaranteed availability payments in pounds per megawatt per hour. So providers tender in a fee, and if they're successful, they're guaranteed that fee for the duration of which they're contracted. Speaking of which, we procure these products across electricity forward agreement blocks. So these are 6 4-hour blocks across the operational day. We allow stacking of these products together, and we also allow stacking of these products with other services, including including reserve products, which are typically longer duration and designed to replace lost energy. And to give you a feel for how much of these products we procure, our highest volume product at the moment is the dynamic containment high product, where typically we can procure around 1.4 gigawatts of response for each electricity forward agreement block. So there's a growing market in GB for this need. It's typically mostly met by battery storage facilities. So that's a little bit about response and how that interacts with the policy that we set, with the frequency risk and control report, and within our inertia operating threshold as well. But now we wanted to talk more about how we currently meet our stability needs in GB and which mechanisms we have at our disposal to make sure that our inertia and short circuit level remain above those limits that I mentioned earlier, and to ensure that the system remains intact. Firstly, we have a contribution of stability from the market, the energy market, as a byproduct of producing energy. And by this, I mean typically from synchronous units that are scheduling themselves in energy markets to produce power. So this includes things like thermal units or pump storage hydro, units which provide spinning mass and can therefore provide also a proportion of inertia and short circuit level. As I mentioned earlier on, in the past, this contribution has been significantly greater than it has been today, albeit we still see a significant proportion of units self-dispatching and providing some inertia to the grid. And so, for example, on some days, there may not be a requirement for ESO to intervene currently. However, as we know with the longer term trend and how the power system is changing, more and more occasions are coming about where we have to intervene and increase inertia above that what's currently 130 GVA second threshold. The next one is something we'll come on to talk about in a little while, which is Stability Pathfinders. And as Charlie mentioned in the introduction, these are our new long-term contracts that we've procured in the last few years. We've done 3 phases, which I'll come on to talk about, and procured a total of around 36 GVA seconds of inertia and also significant volumes of short circuit level. And where a requirement remains in real time, we also have an opportunity to instruct units that provide inertia through our residual balancing market, the balancing mechanism. And this typically means synchronizing a synchronous machine for energy in order to access their system services such as inertia and short circuit level, as well as also voltage support. And I wanted to provide an example of how this works in practice, and quite a recent example. So I wanted to show from last weekend, for example, on Sunday, the 12th of May. This is typically how the inertia that was distributed across the day. I've split it up into a few key areas which correlate with the last slide. So that proportion of market provided inertia in pink, the proportion of inertia that we get from Pathfinder assets, and then where we've taken additional actions to increase that amount of inertia that we have further. And so across this cross section, you can see also the target inertia threshold, currently 130 GVA seconds, obviously to be reduced in the future. And you can see that for the majority of the day, the market provided inertia was below the target threshold. What we therefore did was instruct on our Stability Pathfinder machines to ensure that the contracts that we have currently struck are efficiently used and that threshold can be increased so that we can have more inertia on the grid. However, that wasn't enough in all circumstances, so we also had to take specific actions on this day in the balancing mechanism to increase this further to ensure that we satisfied our minimum inertia threshold. I mentioned Stability Pathfinders and want to talk a little bit about those now. Firstly, Pathfinders are a term that is more broad than just stability. So we've ran a series of Pathfinders over the last few years for a combination of voltage, thermal constraints, and stability. And so this map shows some of the areas where we've procured these services in the past. The first Pathfinder that we launched for stability was back in 2020, and this was our first phase of procuring inertia from the market on long-term contracts. This was a GB-wide tender, so we procured inertia for England, Wales and Scotland, and 12.5 GVA seconds were successful in the tender process. The way that we commercialise these contracts is we provide a guaranteed availability payment for contracts for contracted assets across 6 years, which were the initial duration of Pathfinder contracts. The successful participants in this Pathfinder were all synchronous compensators, so we're able to provide stability to the grid at 0 megawatt export. And as we speak now, all of these units are live and have been for a little while and are providing inertia on a daily basis to help support the system. We followed Stability Phase 1 soon after with a second Pathfinder, and this was designed to procure inertia specifically in Scotland but also to help provide short circuit level support in some of our areas of greatest need. Similarly, we paid providers for availability in these markets. We required that providers could guarantee their availability across the year to a minimum of 90%, so that we reduce risk significantly, and we planned outage patterns around the times in which we forecast the least amount of inertia need. In this phase, we procured 6 GVA seconds of inertia, and this was across another 5 synchronous compensators, but also our first ever example of procuring stability from grid forming solutions. In this case, these were grid forming battery energy storage systems. These assets aren't quite live yet, but they will be later this year and will deliver services for the next 10 years. And the final Stability Pathfinder that we conducted was in 2022, where we procured 17 GVA seconds of inertia across another 5 regions in England and Wales. And we also met our SCL needs for areas of need that have been identified. The commercial arrangements were similar for this as they have been to previous Pathfinders, 10-year contract duration spanning out to the mid-2030s. And again, another procurement activity which was dominated by synchronous compensators. And cumulatively across these Pathfinders, they were designed to be a test of how we can procure these services competitively versus the counterfactual and the alternative, which traditionally was through the transmission operators building assets. And the forecast benefit that we've got from these 3 Pathfinders by the time that all of those contracts expire in 2035 is over £15 billion. So it was a really good proof of concept to show that services could be provided more cost effectively than they had been in the past if we could compete them in open, transparent, predictable markets. And with that led to the Stability Market Innovation Project, which Charlie mentioned at the start. So we launched an innovation project to try and understand, we've proven a concept through Stability Pathfinders, but what more can we do to try and competitively procure these services in the future? We worked with some consultants to start with a blank sheet of paper, evaluate the long-term contracts that we had and the efficiency that we thought that those would bring, but also what alternative market mechanisms could we use in order to complement that. So this slide will talk through a little bit about what that market design looks like holistically across 3 discrete markets that we recommended. The first type of market followed on from what I've talked about with Stability Pathfinders. So the long-term year-4 market is designed to be a further iteration of that Pathfinder process. It's designed to procure capacity in advance and allow us to signal the need for new assets in advance. It will allow us to finance particularly new build capacity, but also allow a signal for enhanced capability from existing assets. And I'll talk through this in a little bit more detail now. As I mentioned, it was designed that they would run at the year-4 stage to provide sufficient notice for the market to be able to tender, build, construct, commission, and then eventually go live. So for these assets. The long-term market is, as I alluded to, split into 2 small parts. There is the Pathfinder style approach where we can provide contract duration of 10+ years in order to guarantee availability over a long period of time and ensure that the market has sufficient time to recover the costs of new build assets, which, as we typically know, can be expensive. But it also offers a route for existing capability to try and provide retrofit capability. So if it is cheaper to reinforce a current asset than building a new asset, we want to try and compete those services together. Hence, we're minded to offer a shorter contract duration, still with the year-4 lead time. As with Pathfinders, these are baseload contracts, so we expect the providers to be available for a minimum of 90% of the year. And we incentivize them through an availability payment for that in reward for that level of availability. But we also have introduced through the long-term market something different from Pathfinders with an additional delivery payment. And this means that providers can be paid a delivery payment for the periods in which they are utilised. And so we allow a two-part payment structure here for providers to recover fixed costs, but also to recover variable costs when they're utilised. The main value add from the Stability Market Innovation Project comes in the next two markets as well to complement the long-term procurement activity that we'd already established through Pathfinders. The first of which is a mid-term year-1 market, and this is intended to procure capacity again in advance of real time, and it will allow us to do that at the year-1 stage. So it will allow us to slightly close to real time react to changes in requirements that we've modeled. The midterm market is predominantly targeted to optimize existing capacity that exists on the network. So we knew that from engaging with industry and talking to the market and doing some research that there were significant steps being made in the area of inertia provision, particularly from grid forming capability, but also there were existing units on the GB network that could provide inertia if they were incentivized to do so appropriately. However, we don't preclude new assets from participating in the midterm market for clarity. The year ahead market offers 1 year duration contracts, again, at a base load level of a minimum of 90% availability and a similar payment structure for availability and delivery. I'll talk more about the midterm market on the next slide because this is the one that we're progressing at pace. The final market in the suite of stability markets that we recommended is a short-term day-ahead market. And the real purpose of this market is to procure capacity much closer to real time when we have a much better view of what our requirements are based on more accurate forecasts of demand and generation contribution and frequency response holdings, etc. But it also unlocks stability provision for a new type of asset, typically the non-dedicated asset that may be stacking different services, stability, energy, ancillary services. And so offering a route to market close to real time allows the optionality for those providers to revenue stack as best as they can. As I mentioned, the lead time for this market is the day ahead stage, which will align with the dynamic frequency response products that I mentioned on an earlier slide. And we propose to procure inertia only through this market through discrete service windows. Again, we're trying to standardize as much as we can, so we're looking to align the procurement of stability services with the current process for frequency response in ether blocks. I mentioned the midterm market, and I want to share a little bit more detail on this as one of the highlights of the Stability Market Design project and the work that we're doing at the moment here in GB. So the midterm market is the market that we've launched as a priority out of those three, and that's driven by the requirements that we have, the requirements modeling that we have done, and the trends that we're seeing in inertia requirements. But also it reflects the capability which currently exists on the system and the type of provider that we're wishing to access. As I mentioned, we think that there is significant additional capability out there that we could contract with in order to increase our inertia threshold, in order to increase our inertia provision and help meet that inertia threshold in advance of building new assets. So we launched the midterm market last year. It is first of a kind, so we're trying to really trailblaze with this and encourage a different way of accessing stability services than how we have done previously. From the first delivery year, which will commence in October 2025, we're seeking to procure a target capacity of 10 GVA seconds of inertia, and this will help us meet shortfalls across the year, which we typically observe in our modelling of somewhere between 5 to 15% of the hours of the year where an inertia shortfall exists below that minimum threshold that I mentioned. The way that this process works is we signal a requirement to industry, and we engage with them on a consultation process to set out some contract terms, some more information about the products and the way that the process would run. And the way that we will evaluate bids is through a two-stage process. Firstly, we will do some technical feasibility assessments of providers' assets. So they will submit information to us as part of the midterm market process, which will include technical studies of their assets and of the network, so that we can ensure that the requirement that we have put out is sufficiently being met by the contracted, the capacity that will be contracted. Second part of the process is a commercial evaluation against the alternative counterfactual that exists. As I mentioned on one of the previous slides, that current counterfactual is the balancing mechanism. So it's instructing additional synchronous machines close to real time. And we think that through the midterm market, we can access a lower cost way of doing that. One of the big things about the midterm market, and all stability markets in fact, is the eligibility criteria that we've established for these. For the first year ahead market that will commence from delivery in October 2025, we're seeking solutions from synchronous plant, which can contribute inertia at 0 megawatt export. So part of the problem that we see now is when we instruct additional machines on to provide inertia, typically during high periods of renewable penetration, the system is oversupplied with energy. Therefore, to contract with this type of asset that can provide inertia independently of megawatts, akin to how non-synchronous plant with grid forming capability would provide it, we think that we can operate the system at a much lower cost, and it will also facilitate zero carbon operation. With that in mind, the typical types of technology that we see participating in these markets, and particularly the first year of the midterm market, is similar to Pathfinders in that there are some synchronous compensators that we would expect will participate, along with grid forming energy storage as well as pumped hydro storage. And the idea of the year ahead market is we will repeat this annually to be able to secure our requirement year on year. So for example, we will soon be preparing for the second delivery year from October 2026 onwards. And I wanted to fast forward a little bit to therefore what the picture may look like in the 2030s. I showed you the example for last Sunday, the 12th of May, and how we met our minimum inertia thresholds there. But what stability markets should really do, and the overall aim here, is to replace some of those more expensive, sometimes high carbon solutions for providing inertia that we have today in the balancing mechanism with cheaper solutions in the long run that are procured openly, competitively, transparently through stability markets. And so therefore that graph on the left hand side that was previously made up of different components, we expect over time should be gradually replaced by the overarching stability market design that I mentioned. And we definitely see the long-term, mid-term and short-term markets all working in parallel together. We don't see this as a silver bullet and a one market fits all. We think that the blend of long-term procurement, medium-term procurement of existing assets, and short-term procurement to refine that close to real time is the optimal solution. And the four key benefits that I've listed on the right-hand side are things that we think this will achieve: cost efficiency, greater mitigation of system security risk, better transparency and more explicit investment signals for the market, and also to hopefully facilitate more operation of the system at zero carbon. And so with that in summary, I'd like to round up the presentation and share a little bit about what the priority is in terms of future work, how what we've done previously over the last couple of years has set us up for the implementation of broader stability markets and the order in which we envisage this happening. We know that this is a new concept. We know that there aren't lots of examples of competitive procurement of stability around the globe. So we're mindful that stability markets really need to be embedded and also improved on to drive that investment and efficiency and confidence within the market. Therefore, we've launched the first year ahead market, and one of our big priorities to ensure how can we improve this year on year. So we plan to run an annual consultation process for the midterm market to seek feedback from providers. The other thing that we see as really crucial in the mix over the next few years is the development of the short-term market and how we can accelerate the provision of inertia from non-dedicated assets, how we can unlock competition from new technology types, and ultimately try and provide them the most efficient solution to the ESO. The other thing to highlight is the year -4 market will be developed also in parallel, but we will only launch this according to system needs. So as I mentioned, the system requirements at the moment suggest that we could make best use of the current existing capability that exists on the network, but we're also mindful that things change over time. New generation will connect, policy will change, we will see new trends emerge on the system. Therefore, we think the long-term market could play a core role in mitigating the impacts of that. And the final thing to mention is the role of grid forming capability. We see that currently being incentivized through markets, but we will also explore the possibility of mandating the capability of grid forming possibly in the future if we think that particular locations or particular asset types would add value there. And it goes without saying that this picture is continually growing, and there's more and more topics that relate to it. So we're also pursuing innovation in the form of new inertia measurement tools, which there's plenty of information on those found on our website, but trying to get a better understanding of how inertia is changing, but also looking at how we can improve modeling and contribution of inertia from different sources as well. So that was a whistle stop, and I'd happily take any questions, and we'll also signpost you to some more detailed information that we have on this on the website for anybody who's interested.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Thanks for that tour through your markets there for stability services. It's quite enlightening. We've got a lot of questions keyed up here, so let me go ahead and dive into them. First one from Mark O'Malley. When you say co-optimized, I think you were talking about some of the dynamic market products then.
Yeah.
Is that with respect to the 3 products only, or does it include other products like reserve products?
So at the moment, the co-optimization is limited to the 3 response products. We launched a new auction platform in November last year, which facilitated the co-optimization of those 3 products as a starter. However, we've got plans to introduce 2 new reserve products in the next 12 to 18 months, and we think there's potential to co-optimize those in the long run as well. So we definitely see response and reserve being combined in that co-optimization picture in the long run.
Okay. Another question here. How do you balance mandatory requirements for connection and non-mandatory services procured at some minimum economically efficient amount?
Good question. So yeah, I think there's definitely a balance to be struck between the mandatory provision of services and the non-mandatory, and how we incentivize that through markets. In the past, much more of the services have been mandated on particular technology types and then rewarded through commercial mechanisms. The way that we've shifted here in GB is to try and be more explicit in the procurement of services in a non-mandatory way through market mechanisms. So hence launching the new frequency response products and also stability markets, rather than making them implicit things that are provided by generation as mandatory services. We think that competing them through open, transparent markets is the way to go. Having said that, we are continually looking, as I mentioned on the last slide, at code reform and how we can understand the benefits of possibly mandating more things in the future.
Right. Let's see, things are popping around here. So next one is, rather than do Stability Pathfinder, where you have a long-term contract, why not have a day ahead or real-time inertia market?
Great question, and I hope that question was asked before we got to the latter slides, because hopefully that will
Yeah.
have provided an answer. But I think in general we see, as I mentioned, a role for all three of these different types of markets. I think they serve different purposes. The long-term contracts provide security both to us, but also to market participants in terms of guaranteeing revenues that help pay back potentially expensive asset build. But the closer real time unlocks services, service provision from different types of assets, as I mentioned. I think you could see potentially, as we've seen with some of the response products, a migration of how we procure these services from the longer term closer to real time. But I think that's a gradual transition as we gain more confidence with utilizing these services and the market has more confidence in them too.
Right, moving in that direction. Speaking of certain technology types, um, do you have any criteria to select certain technology types to calculate the in-feed loss to calculate inertia requirements?
That is probably a technical question that I'll take away if that's okay.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Um, were these products tested when procured, and if so, how is it done?
So by testing, I'll perhaps give a couple of answers that will hopefully cover that. So I suppose testing in terms of, are they the right mechanisms and do they deliver the right outcomes? Stability Pathfinders were definitely intended to be that test bed to prove the concept first and foremost, which then led us to the stability market design. A different interpretation of testing would be I suppose the physical testing and the, the technology element of it, and each of the markets in their own right will have a testing process that will allow us to validate that the service that they're providing to us is exactly what we require and to the specification, and we can use performance monitoring tools as well to make sure that that's appropriate.
Okay. Do you treat inertia from synchronous machines and synthetic inertia responses from IBRs differently?
We don't
Okay, that's very
at the moment.
simple.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we obviously with the first grid forming batteries going online as part of phase two, stability phase two this year, we will get a lot of learnings from that, but at the moment we treat them the same.
Question from Ramadapa. Do you see any application of StatComs with energy storage for stability markets in place of synchronous condensers in the future?
Good question. There's been an innovation project in GB that's still ongoing that is looking at exactly this. I think the way that we design markets is designed to be technology agnostic, so we would definitely like to see new technologies coming forward to provide this. We obviously have to guarantee that they can meet all of the technical criteria. So I think one of the things that we found with the energy statcoms is the storage element and how big that needs to be. So that's something that we need to work through. But yeah, definitely see the role of new tech coming through and competing in these markets.
I think in Germany, I think there's a procurement underway for some large 25 gigavars of StatComs with energy storage,
Yeah,
something like that.
yeah, I'm aware. We've spoken to Tenet about this previously. It's an interesting one to keep tabs on for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Um, are there any regions within GB or other interconnected regions where inertia requirements are shared between regions? Is there a mechanism to coordinate this process?
So GB is an island grid. It's a power system which is yeah unique to GB. So whilst we're interconnected for with HVDC links to Europe and to Ireland, we're an island grid. So there's no interactions really between inertia with different different synchronous areas.
How about within GB itself? I think there's some locational procurement of services between north and south, if I'm not mistaken.
So for things like short circuit level, where there is a locational element to it, we have specified different regions of need in the Pathfinder process in particular. But for inertia, we currently treat this as a national product, and there's no locational constraints in that at the moment. Although having said that, if further research were to determine that locational inertia could be valuable, then we may seek to reflect that in our market design.
Okay. The next one was how was inertia need met on the day when the outrun inertia exceeded the target inertia?
So that's a good question. So the slide where I showed the example from last weekend, you saw a particular period of the graph where the outturn inertia was significantly higher than the target inertia. Typically, that's because several things. One, I think in this example, there was more plant self-dispatching in the market, which naturally increased the inertia that was on the system. But also we were still intervening for other system reasons, such as system voltage. And with that, we also got inertia as a byproduct from some of those generation from those actions that we took. Hence, you saw that peak rise quite steeply towards the end of the day in that example.
Yes. You're getting some inertia from residual energy, some from Stability Pathfinder, and some from balancing. How do you decide how much should come from Pathfinder?
So good question, and it's quite a dynamic fact that there's many dynamic factors that we have to consider: risk, appetite. So how much shortfall do we think we have, and how confident are we that we could meet that with the generation that we have available in real time? But also a big driver is cost. So typically we will procure services against the alternative counterfactual being the balancing mechanism. So if we think we can access capacity to meet our shortfalls cheaper in Pathfinders than we do in the balancing mechanism, we would do that as a cost saving measure. Going forward, when you have a combination of long-term, mid-term, short-term markets, there's a really important question about how we strike that balance between what we procure in each timescale. But I think that will definitely be an iterative thing over time, where we find the right balance based on risk and cost and technology types, etc.
Okay. A little bit of judgment required there.
Absolutely.
How can the minimum inertia threshold be reduced?
So this, yes, this is a main purpose of the FRCR. So this looked at how we can model different amounts of inertia with different sized losses, different type of response products, different speed of response services, and how can we still contain frequency within our statutory limits if in the event of a largest loss disconnection. And so typically there's one element of it is the risk appetite and how we quantify that, which is where the FRCR comes in. But the second one is the speed and the volume of the response products that we procure in parallel with the inertia. So striking that the appropriate blend of that is how we can justify and realize those cost savings of reducing the inertia threshold down to 102.
Okay. I think we've got time for maybe one more question. Another one from Mark O'Malley. You said there are more resources out there in inertia than you can get to participate in the Y-1 market. How do you know?
So I think that if I can just correct the way that that's sort of worded slightly, I think we don't necessarily see that there's more resources available than we need, but we think there is sufficient resources available if they can be incentivized appropriately. And the way that we do that is through market research. We have information of units that are commissioning and connecting to the grid, and we know the technical characteristics that some of those might have, and also talking to providers, including those who are contracted under Pathfinder units, Pathfinder arrangements, but also other units that are commissioning to the grid and who talk to us and say we could provide stability services if the incentive is right. So yeah, engagement with industry plus some research and understanding what assets are connecting to the system.
Okay, we're about at the top of the hour, so we're going to need to wrap it up. I want to thank Ed for this really informative webinar on the stability market design activities at ESO. I think we're all going to continue to learn a lot from what they're doing. As I mentioned earlier, an email will go out once the video file has been posted, and we'll answer the questions we didn't get to and get them posted as quickly as possible. We appreciate your participation, and if you'd like to stay engaged, I'd like to invite you to participate in the next ESIG webinar on Thursday on accelerating and scaling up grid enhancing technologies, or GETS. And then for all of our grid forming fans, we'll have a webinar on Wednesday, May 22 next week on grid forming solutions for plant compliance at the point of interconnection. I'd also like to invite you to attend the ESIG Forecasting and Markets Workshop in Salt Lake City the week of June 10, less than a month away, featuring a great lineup of topics and speakers. Further information on all of our webinars and events can be found on our website, esig.energy, under events, and you're all invited to attend. Information on all the G-PST webinars can also be found at globalpst.org. Ed, I want to thank you again for this very timely webinar, and thank all of you for your interest. We look forward to seeing you again in the near future. And in the meantime, everyone, take care, stay safe, and thanks again for your participation. See you soon. Thanks, Ed.